Hey, and welcome back for another episode of Show Off Your CI/CD Pipeline. Today I'm once again joined by Ren Isenberg. Hey Ren, grateful to have you here.
Hi, Honest. Thanks for having me again.
Yeah, it's so much fun working with you, so I'm really glad that you accepted to get on the show again. Today we're going to
Always.
look at feature flagging overall and feature flagging, how to achieve that within your CI/CD pipeline, which is, I think, a pretty interesting topic for our audience. Before we go into that, congratulations on becoming a hero. That's the first time I'm having you on the show after getting into that crowd of heroes.
Well, first of all, congratulations to you as well, and for becoming a hero at the same time. So that's pretty awesome.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's been a crazy, crazy June, to be honest. Crazy month.
can imagine. Yeah, so June, you were like, I think, talking every single day or every second day in public somewhere, right?
Yeah, it was like every week I had like in the AWS Summit in Tel Aviv and meetups and work and whatever, just crazy. And then the hero thing. Awesome month.
Yeah, it was a great month for both of us, I would say, and I think that will be more cool months coming ahead. Now, um, I love the collaboration with you, and I'm really glad that today we can look at something. I think that you also do in your organization, right?
Again, sorry, what?
We're going to look at something that you also use in your own organization. So this is best. This
Yes.
is this
Yes,
is
yes,
stuff
yes.
that you really use at the end,
Yeah, yeah. In
and
production, yeah.
in production. Well, so that's cool. So um, let's try to explain a little bit what is feature flagging and why is it important.
Okay. So feature flags are basically a way to change your service behavior, right? Sometimes you want to have this option because sometimes you deploy to production and then there's an issue or a bug and you want to essentially change the behavior quickly and revert that change. And sometimes just by going through the entire pipeline, reverting the code is going to take too long. But if you had a feature flag, like an implementation, if feature flag is on, do something. Otherwise, do something else. And that new thing, do something, has a bug. If you change the configuration, we're going to discuss how you can do it very quickly, then you can change your service behavior. Essentially, it's all about improving your feature release quality and making sure that you release quality features that you can revert automatically, make canary deployments, things like that, even A/B testing. So it's capabilities that really take you to the next level, basically.
So feature flagging is by default something that the application needs to be capable of, right?
Yeah, but it's an advanced feature. I mean, usually when you write a new service, you don't say, hey, well, I need to have my feature flags right now, right? It's a more advanced topic. Uh, when you come close to going to production, then that's where you usually start to think about, hey, let's add feature flags and this layer of capability.
And but well, still it means that developers need to implement that for you, and it's not a task that you can just activate within the CI/CD pipeline. I think that's what I was going to, right? So the development team or the DevOps team that builds the source code of the application needs to be involved in designing the feature flags process or how you're actually going to activate or deactivate a feature flag. And they also need to implement something within the application code itself.
Yes. Yeah, like I said, the name implementation is you fetch the feature flags from some magical function. It does whatever. We're going to discuss how in a second. And then you need to write the code that actually does something. And you also need to have the infrastructure to change the feature flag, the values themselves. So yeah, usually I advocate for complete developer ownership from the dev stages all the way to production, the monitoring, and even the retire when you remove feature flags, because it is a thing. But yeah, it really depends on the organization and the different jobs, descriptions that you have in your organization.
What you just described is, I would say, the life cycle of a feature flag, which at the end is you're going
Yes.
to need to introduce that. You're going to need to see if it works or not, right? And then you need to retire it again. Why is that retiring piece that important?
Well, as we're going to see later on with some code examples, adding feature flags add complexity to the testing code, to the logic itself, to the business code. And also you need to make sure you have visibility and eyes on the infrastructure itself. You need to understand what you have, what feature flags you have enabled in what environment. And it can become very cumbersome and hard to really understand, have good visibility on what's going on. So at some point when a feature is stable, you'd want to say, hey, well, it's a stable feature. We don't need this special capability to revert in case of some error or problem happens. Let's retire this feature flag and this feature is stable. Let's continue.
Yep. And I think that's something we need to talk a little bit detailed later, as I think feature flags should always be only temporarily, right? So they should be then once again removed once you don't need them anymore. And I think that's something where, at least in some projects that I was part of, I struggled in the past because I just leave them there forever, right? So you really need a process to maintain those as well.
Yeah. There are flags that you can use for special use cases. And in those cases, you might not really want to remove them. It really depends. You might have a flag that tells you, hey, I want to enable premium features for different types of users. And maybe it's a tier, maybe you have a premium tier for customers, and you might want them to have like better features, right? And these kind of configurations, they might not get removed, and that's okay. It's like a way to really have dynamic configuration and just change the flow depending on whether it's a free tier user, whether it's a premium tier user. So these are feature flags that you will probably keep, maybe even expand in the future, but mostly most feature flags are temporarily as I see them.
Okay, cool. That is enough introduction, I hope. If you have follow-up questions on the concept of feature flagging, feel free to reach out to Ran or to myself later as well. But now let's jump a little bit into code, right? And into seeing how do we actually deploy feature flags and how do we update them on the fly. So whenever you're ready, feel free to...
Okay, well, I think, okay, so for my implementation,
Mhm.
I'm using AWS Lambda Power Tools, the feature flags utility for fetching the configuration and doing all sorts of cool things.
I'm gonna add one or two sentences here, Ran, if you don't mind. So first of all, Lambda Power Tools being an open source tool that Ran has been contributing to in the past. It is available on GitHub. I can link to it in the show notes as well. It gives a lot of handy features for Lambda for making it easier to write Lambda functions. Other than that, I think it also is a pretty interesting project. So I've recently recorded with Hator around the CI/CD pipeline for that project, which is amazing as well.
Yeah, they define basically all the best practices for Lambda, but this specific utility, the feature flags, you can use it in any basically container, EC2, whatever. It doesn't need to really run on Lambda, so it's you can use it today. It's in Python, only Python at the moment, but it's very simple to write. So there are other variations of Power Tools, and I think that they would be happy to get the contributions for this in other languages, Java,
TypeScript, and other stuff that might be coming soon. Then another thought on AppConfig. Maybe you can briefly explain the service.
Yes, yeah, sure. So AWS AppConfig, as the name suggests, it's an application configuration service. So it's a AWS managed service for basically managing your configuration, your dynamic configuration. And basically what it allows us is to upload a JSON configuration file and fetch it in our application. And it allows you to deploy new configurations with canary deployments and set up CloudWatch alarms for to monitor your service. So if during the deployment, the alarms go off, then it will automatically roll back the configuration and go back to the previous version, which I think is pretty amazing, to be honest. It's an amazing capability that you get basically for free, just built in the app config. And I've mentioned dynamic configuration. If you don't mind, I want to really clarify what it means. So there are two ways of really adding feature flags, or basically configuration. Feature flags are configuration, right? I'm going to create them in a JSON file. So this is the diagram for static configuration. What it means that you have your service code and you have this configuration file that you bundle with your service and you deploy to AWS, right? For Lambda, you create a zip file, you add it to the zip file and upload the zip file to AWS account. Now, let's say that you want to change your feature flag. Well, you need to change the file in the service code and then go through and then deploy it again. Basically, you go through the entire pipeline, all the testing, all the things that you have, and usually it takes a lot of time. So that's why I mean it's static, because the service needs to be updated as well. It doesn't change without the service being redeployed.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other hand, when you have something like this, so on the left, we have our pipeline, the service pipeline, we upload the Lambda. But here, the Lambda uses a new magical API to check for a new configuration. And it takes the configuration from some cloud resource that it has in the cloud and just uses that. So this configuration resource, it gets uploaded with its own configuration pipeline. And what it does essentially is just taking the JSON file and uploading it to the cloud. In our case, it's going to be AppConfig, and then it's going to be very quick, very simple. So basically, the Lambda is still alive, and it checks for new configuration on invocations. And when the configuration changes, the Lambda is going to get it, it's going to read it, it's going to change its behavior if you flip that switch. And that's it. It's very simple. It's dynamic because you don't need to deploy the service. It's very quick, right? That's the advantage that you're getting here.
Mm-hmm.
But the disadvantages are that you need to basically provide a new configuration pipeline and maintain it, and just another resource to maintain. So this is how it looks.
Yeah, can we just pause for 1 or 2
Yeah.
seconds so I can ask 1 or 2 questions around the two possibilities of implementing that. First one, do you have an experience like, so in the first option that we saw is we prepare everything, we configure that package, we upload it, and then when we execute all of that process in the production environment, it's going to be just accessing my local Lambda configuration functions and configuration and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. The second thing that we saw, it looks like there's some more latency stuff that we're going to introduce.
Yes.
Because we need to call an external service to our Lambda function. Would you say that this is a negative aspect of it?
Yes. Yes, of course. I mean, obviously, you're doing an API call, but there is, if I recall, it's about 100 to 200 milliseconds, but you have an internal cache in the Lambda itself, in the utility that we're going to use, the Partools utility that fetches from AppConfig. So it really depends on the cache configuration. Mm-hmm. So if you give it like 5 minutes, so if you have numerous invocations in that 5-minute span of time, they're not going to call that API. They're going to use the JSON file that they loaded in the first call. So mm-hmm. Yes, this is a disadvantage, but you can make it better with the cache mechanism.
Okay, that makes sense. And on this second implementation option, I assume that the deployed function needs to come up with a good set of defaults, right? Because the service needs to work even if the configuration resource is not available. Is that correct?
Yeah, there is in the SDK, you can provide a default value that tells you whether the configuration, even if you might search for a flag that maybe was removed for some reason by mistake and you don't want to crash. That's true.
Okay, cool. But the second option allows you to reconfigure on the fly, as you said, right? And
Yes.
the first option does not really allow that in that sense.
Yeah.
Okay. So would you
Yeah.
say that from
So
an
this is how it looks like
okay, yeah,
with AppConfig.
let's go into that direction.
Okay. So do you want me to show the console for AppConfig for a second, just to show the entities?
Yep, let's do that.
Okay. So I'm gonna zoom in a bit. So this is AppConfig, and we have an application. The application is basically, it's really up to you. It can be a service or microservice. In my case, it's my order service, and I've added some prefixes depending on my username and things like that, and branch. So inside the application, we have environments. Environments here, it's called dev environment, but usually if you follow the AWS guidelines, you'd have different accounts for different environments. So usually you'd have just one environment here, always just one, and not dev, test, whatever, because we're not mixing environments. Now, I'm going to click on the environment, and as you can see, there's a deployment of different configurations. And there's my conf. That's the configuration that I'm using in my service. You can have numerous configurations, and it has versions. Now let's go into, and you can see that it's completed, it's deployed. Now, if I were to click on the configuration, you can see that it was deployed successfully. If it were canary deployments, then you'd have like percentages going up all the way to 100. And if I can click on the configuration, you can see the actual JSON file that I uploaded. And this is what I uploaded in my code for my CDK code, my infrastructure as code framework. And this is what we're going to use in our application. I don't want to go into too much into the details on this. This is a specific implementation that Power Tools, the Feature Flags utility, knows how to read. This is like a more advanced use case where you enable different features for specific customers. Like if the customer name is Run the Builder, then we're going to enable the premium feature is going to be true. And in this case, you have a more regular feature flag where you have 10% off campaign, where we have a campaign for a discount and the default value is true, right? We have a campaign, we want to offer discounts for our users. So that's how it looks. Do you have any questions surrounding that?
No, well, kind of. Feature flags are always string, or are they Boolean, or are they numeric? Is there some typing that you can do?
Yes. So the SDK allows you to have, I think in the most feature flags utilities out there, like LaunchDuckly and others, they all allow for complex values. Also here, you can have Boolean, like I did here, or you can have basically any JSON value. So you can have a list of strings, just strings, integers, dictionaries, whatever you want. It really depends on your use case, and it supports it. I prefer to use a simple like Boolean because it's usually easier to understand and it's very natural. Right, so let's look at some code maybe. Okay, so let's start from the CDK code. So what we're looking at is my project, open source, AWS Lambda Handler Cookbook, where I have a sample serverless service that you can create and deploy with all the best practices. And it also has feature flags. And in the CDK part, there is a configuration construct. Now, this is where it's a bit different. Since this is a sample application, I didn't do two pipelines because I need people to be able to create the template and get it working and not to be dependent on some resource in my personal account. So when you take this, you need to put this construct, this part of the pipeline into a different pipeline, different stack. But the idea basically that I have all the CFN, here's the application and the environment that we saw, and the configuration profile, how to deploy it, and the deployment strategy. I did immediately, like no canary deployments. And in the end, you have the JSON file, and it's under the JSON folder. And this is the file that we saw
that we just looked
uploaded.
at. Yeah.
Yes. So it's very simple. just copy paste the CDK, change the JSON to whatever you want, and it will get uploaded to AppConfig.
And you, for deployment, you have one CDK pipeline right now, or?
Yeah, just one, because it's a template, and I didn't want to have because people are cloning it and making them their own, and I can't have a dependency in another repository.
Yep.
So I write it in the README. Please separate it into a different pipeline so it will be dynamic. Otherwise, it's going to be static configuration, which is not ideal. Okay, so then we have the Lambda side, right? The business code that fetches.
Okay, so that was so sorry. One step back. If we can go back to that picture, that diagram that we had, this is in the second version of the implementation, I would say, right? Or in this one, right? So this is now the right-hand side that we see. It's all of the AppConfig configuration that we need, the infrastructure as code to get the AppConfig up and running at the end. Now, if you see this as a kind of microservice as part of your application or as a component within your application, the other part, which is the Lambda runtime handler that we're going to look at, needs to know about the configuration on the backend. So here, if we think like we have two different teams or two different persons owning that, they need to talk about exactly how they configure that and what feature flags are available and that stuff, right?
Yeah, I think it should be the same team, to be honest, because it is part of the application itself, and it's just another CDK resource that the team owns, just like every other database or whatever. The Lambda, all that it needs is basically, I think, 3 environment variables, basically to know what's the application name, the environment name, and what's the configuration name that it wants to fetch. You put that into the Power Tools utility, and it does the work for you, basically. So it's very simple.
Okay, cool.
Okay, so let's see how we do that. So I'm gonna jump into the logic layer of the Lambda. It's somewhere inside where you're going to handle a request, and then you need to realize, hey, let's take a look at what feature flags do I have, what's enabled, disabled, and then do the different behaviors. So this is exactly what I did. You have here, I want to fetch the campaign, the 10% campaign off that we saw earlier. So I'm using the configuration store. I have a getter for the Power Tools class. I create a new class for the AppConfig store and the feature flags utility. I don't want to get into too much, but again, this is the environment name, the application name, the configuration name. And I also provide the cache, how long do I want to have my cache. It's all these things are from the environment variables that I provide my Lambda. And then I just use the Power Tools utility. It's called evaluate. So I tell it, hey, let me know what's the value of the 10% campaign feature flag. The default value is going to be false, because if it doesn't exist or there's a problem, false. And there's the context. Context is if you recall, we had another example where the customer name changes the value of the flag. If the customer name is Ron the Builder, then enable the premium features. If not, then it's going to be different. So this is where you put the premium, the customer name. This is the example here. Just put a simple dictionary, customer name, and the input that we got from the input request, the customer name. So in our case, it's a simple feature flag, no context, that's it. So when we run this, we have the value, and it says, if the campaign feature flag is on, handle the campaign. It's an empty function, doesn't do that much. It's a simple. If not, then I'm not doing anything, just debugging that campaign is off. Same thing for Premium. If Premium, then I apply the Premium user discount. If not, I'm not doing anything. So this is the naive implementation. I think that most feature flags look like this. And this is basically how you change the behavior, right? If campaign is on, you do something, otherwise you do something else. If you were to change the campaign value in the app config, then the Lambda, the if would handle it differently here. So this is why it's dynamic.
Yep, that makes sense. I think For backend, all feature flags look like that. I believe for frontend, it might be a little bit different, right? Or do you have experience with handling feature flags in
Yes.
frontend as well?
Yeah. So what we did is basically when a user logs in, there's an API call that's sent to the backend. It's called /configuration or get user whatever configuration. You provide the context of the user, other data, whatever, and it fetches from AppConfig the configuration for the UI and just returns back to the UI the flag. So like the backend is also the facilitator for getting the app config flags for the UI configuration.
Okay,
That's how we do it.
makes sense from a user's perspective. But still, I think that feature flags here might need to be handled a little bit different as well, right? So especially if you turn on a feature on the back end, and kind of the front end needs to update itself automatically, right? So that needs to be well prepared. And on the backend side, what I would be interested in, we talked about caching these feature flags a little bit earlier. Now we're looking at the Lambda function. Aren't Lambda functions ephemeral and just gone again after they have been executed?
Yeah. Well, it really depends. Basically, you can have caching mechanisms for in-memory caching for the Lambda itself. It really depends. I mean, you don't really know what AWS does with their Lambda, but usually when it's warm, it stays up to handle more requests. It doesn't get killed automatically. It's like an optimization for AWS. So this cache, it is working. I mean, I saw it work, and you can trace it that it works. But you don't really know when the container is going to go down, when you're going to have a new cold start, things like that. But if you really want to make sure that it's working always, you can use provision concurrency, and then you have some instances of the Lambdas that are always up and running, but it's going to cost you more. And then that in-memory cache is basically guaranteed to work.
Yeah,
So it's an effort, but it's not always optimal.
yeah, and I was trying to understand: do I need to think about where do I retrieve my values in the Lambda function? So whether it's going to be in the init phase or whether it's going to be in the handler itself, right? Is that something that you would think of? We need to advise people. Well, you should always get your feature flags in the init phase, so in the constructor of the module. Or how would you say that?
So usually what I do is get the configuration as fast as possible to store it in my file, because I think that if you have a problem, it really, again, depends. I use AppConfig for both feature flags, and they have default values, but also for configurations. And I see it as a mandatory service. So I'd rather that we load it as soon as possible and we verify it against the schema to make sure that everything is valid. The same thing we do with environment variables. And if there's a problem, then I'd like to fail the Lambda as soon as possible, so it fails the test and it doesn't get pushed into production. So yeah, it is like a mandatory research. It's like your database going down. So it really depends. If you have just feature flags, you might be able to have default values and get away with it. But if you have more configurations, like I have in my example here, I have like static configuration. I have a configuration that I use not with the feature flags API, but with the just generic configuration. I have like list of countries that I support, whatever, and I need these values, right? I'm not always. I need this to be able to process it in my code. So what I did is, again, first thing that I do, I check the configuration, environment variables, parse the input, whatever. If everything is okay, only then I continue to process the request. Otherwise, I raise an exception and just, there was a misconfiguration or whatever.
Okay, cool. So now we looked at details in the source code on how to define feature flags and how to actually react on feature flags. We also looked a little bit on the Lambda function that actually retrieves those. What we kind of forgot or did not really talk about yet is the lifecycle of those feature flags and the deployment and update of those feature flags. Do we want to jump into that now?
Yes, let's do it.
And with this, we are ending the first part of the recording with ran around feature flags. Please tune back in soon to look at the code samples that Ran has prepared, including the project itself. And how do you manage a feature flag lifecycle within your application? Thank you so much for watching, and see you soon.